When you spend enough time around people with avoidant attachment patterns, you start noticing certain changes that can appear when they are genuinely considering a lasting future with someone. One question comes up again and again. What really changes when an avoidant person starts becoming ready for commitment? Many people want to know whether there are dependable signs that show a relationship is moving beyond uncertainty and becoming more serious. There are certain patterns worth noticing, especially in the way the relationship itself begins to change from both sides. These shifts often appear when an emotionally distant partner becomes more willing to invest and connect at a deeper level. So if you are not seeing all of these signs yet, do not automatically assume that your partner does not care or has no intention of committing. It may simply mean they are not emotionally ready for that stage yet. Think of these behaviors as clues that a relationship is naturally becoming more serious, not as a checklist that must appear overnight. One of the strongest changes is that the avoidant becomes much more comfortable allowing you to take the lead in certain relationship decisions. This can be especially noticeable with dismissive avoidant patterns, although it can happen with anyone, regardless of gender. Usually, avoidant people feel safer when they can control the pace of closeness, because control helps them protect their independence and manage fears of being trapped, overwhelmed, or emotionally consumed. But as trust develops, those fears can become less intense. Instead of needing to control every decision, they become more willing to hear your ideas and accept your preferences without immediately feeling threatened. You might suggest plans for a holiday, organize a family event, or bring up what the next stage of the relationship could look like. Rather than resisting or avoiding the conversation, they may simply say, "That sounds good," or "Let me know what you think." That relaxed willingness to share control does not necessarily mean they have become passive or indifferent. It can reflect increasing trust, greater emotional safety, and a growing belief that letting you guide certain situations does not mean they are giving up their independence. And this is where the next sign becomes especially important, because it reveals whether that growing trust is actually turning into partnership. One of the clearest indications that an avoidant person may be seriously considering a long-term future is becoming more comfortable sharing responsibility within the relationship. They stop feeling as though every important decision must remain under their control and begin understanding that a healthy partnership requires two people working together. They start recognizing that if the relationship eventually moves toward marriage or a lifelong commitment, both partners will naturally make choices that affect their shared future. Another meaningful change is the way they begin paying greater attention to your happiness and well-being. They notice your schedule, your routines, your moods, and the small details that matter to you. Instead of waiting for you to explain every need, they may begin anticipating what could make you feel cared for because they have spent enough time learning who you are. Their effort becomes steadier and more deliberate. They start treating your comfort as something worth considering, rather than something that only matters after you ask for it. That consistency can be more meaningful than dramatic romantic gestures, because it shows that you are becoming part of the way they naturally think about their daily life. Another important shift appears when conversations about commitment and the future come up. Earlier in the relationship, discussions about holidays, travel, marriage, living arrangements, or future plans may have created discomfort and caused them to pull back. Those conversations can activate fears about losing freedom or becoming trapped in expectations. But as their emotional investment increases, the reaction may become noticeably calmer. Instead of becoming defensive, changing the subject, or asking to discuss it later, they may engage with the conversation more openly. If you suggest spending a future holiday together or making plans several months ahead, they may respond with a genuine willingness instead of immediately creating distance. That does not mean every avoidant person will suddenly become enthusiastic about every future conversation. It means their automatic urge to escape begins losing some of its power. They start seeing themselves as someone who belongs in your future, rather than someone who needs to keep one foot outside the relationship. Another powerful sign appears when situations that once triggered strong defensive reactions no longer affect them in quite the same way, even though your behavior may not have changed dramatically. This does not mean that neither person has grown or that insecurity completely disappears. It means their emotional response becomes more balanced. Consider a relationship where one partner has anxious attachment tendencies and the other has avoidant tendencies. Jealousy, uncertainty, and fear of abandonment can easily create repeated arguments. Imagine the more anxious partner becoming uncomfortable when the avoidant partner spends time away, uses their phone frequently, or goes out with friends. Earlier in the relationship, the avoidant may have responded with irritation, insisting that they had done nothing wrong, and questioning why they were not trusted. They may even have threatened to end the relationship, because the repeated reassurance felt overwhelming. But as emotional investment grows, something can change. Even when the anxious partner still has moments of insecurity, the avoidant no longer reacts with the same intensity. Instead of immediately treating the concern as an accusation, they may become more patient. They may offer reassurance without feeling that their independence is being attacked. They may explain what is happening, rather than disappearing from the conversation. That difference matters because emotional maturity is not about never feeling uncomfortable. It is about becoming capable of staying present while the discomfort exists. And if an avoidant person is genuinely becoming more committed, this is often where you begin seeing that development most clearly. Their response to your insecurity becomes less about defending themselves and more about understanding what is happening emotionally between you. Instead of automatically treating your concern like an accusation, they begin recognizing the fear underneath it and understanding that reassurance may be what you actually need. They might casually let you know that they are messaging a family member or talking with a friend, not because they feel pressured to prove their innocence, but because they genuinely want you to feel secure. Their priority slowly changes. They become less focused on protecting themselves from discomfort and more interested in protecting the relationship itself. They become more willing to hold some of your emotional worries because your sense of safety has become important to them. You may notice the same change in ordinary communication. Many people with avoidant patterns can become overwhelmed when they receive several follow-up messages before they have had time to respond, especially while working or handling other responsibilities. Earlier on, repeated calls or messages might have triggered irritation and caused them to pull back even further. But as they move closer to genuine commitment, their reaction can become much more controlled. They may still feel slightly overwhelmed, but they no longer allow that feeling to dictate what they do next. Instead of disappearing, they communicate. They might send a quick message saying they are busy and will call later. When they have more time, they may explain honestly that the repeated messages felt like pressure, while also recognizing that your behavior came from worry rather than harmful intentions. They stop carrying resentment for days or turning one uncomfortable moment into an excuse to create emotional distance. Trust has become stronger than their old instinct to protect themselves. They begin choosing understanding instead of withdrawal, because maintaining the connection matters more than proving who was right in one difficult moment. And that small change can tell you far more than a dramatic declaration ever could. Another meaningful sign appears when they begin asking for your opinion about important decisions without you having to invite yourself into the conversation. People with strong avoidant tendencies are often comfortable making decisions alone because independence has become deeply connected to their sense of safety. They may have spent years believing that relying on themselves was the safest option. But when commitment becomes more real, that mindset can gradually soften. They may ask what you think about selling a home, changing jobs, investing money, moving to another city, or making another major decision that could affect their future. They are not asking simply because it seems polite. They genuinely want to know what you think because your perspective has started carrying real importance in their decision-making. That is a major shift. It suggests they are no longer thinking only in terms of my life, but are beginning to imagine how their choices affect both of you. Alongside this, you may notice a calmer and more confident attitude when conversations involve relationship milestones. Maybe the topic is improving emotional intimacy, living together, becoming engaged, or eventually getting married. Instead of becoming vague, changing the subject, or saying they need more time to think, they may respond with greater certainty. Their words become steadier because the idea of building a future with you no longer feels like a threat to their identity. It begins to feel like a natural direction. That confidence can be one of the strongest signs that they are moving beyond simply considering commitment and are beginning to prepare emotionally for it. For many people with avoidant attachment patterns, commitment is not one dramatic decision made in a single moment. It develops through many small internal changes that slowly replace fear with trust. Early in a relationship, they may examine almost everything through the question of self-protection. They may wonder whether getting closer will cost them their independence, create expectations they cannot escape, or expose them to emotional pain. But when they repeatedly experience safety with the same person, those protective reactions can gradually become less intense. Vulnerability begins to feel less dangerous. Emotional openness starts becoming something useful rather than something threatening. This transformation usually does not happen because of one grand romantic gesture. It develops through repeated experiences of reliability, patience, honest communication, and emotional consistency. That is why you may notice behavioral changes long before they openly announce that they want a lifelong commitment. Their nervous system starts learning through experience. Every time closeness happens without punishment, every time disagreement ends without abandonment, and every time vulnerability is met with respect, the old expectation of danger becomes slightly weaker. Over time, they can begin associating intimacy with safety instead of with losing themselves. That is a much deeper change than simply saying, "I am ready." This is also why emotional safety matters so much. Many people assume that someone with avoidant tendencies only needs physical space, but emotional safety can be just as important, if not more important. When they feel constantly judged, pressured, criticized, or forced into emotional conversations before they are ready, their nervous system may interpret closeness as a threat rather than an invitation to connect. But when they repeatedly experience calm communication, respect, patience, and healthy boundaries, something different begins happening internally. Their mind starts learning that emotional conversations do not automatically lead to conflict. Instead of expecting rejection every time vulnerability appears, they begin expecting acceptance. That makes it easier to remain present during difficult conversations, rather than shutting down or becoming defensive. Eventually, emotional closeness can stop feeling like a loss of freedom and begin feeling like a place where they can actually relax. And this challenges one of the biggest misunderstandings about avoidant attachment. Being emotionally distant does not necessarily mean someone feels nothing. Many people with avoidant patterns experience powerful emotions, but learn to suppress, minimize, or compartmentalize them, because expressing those feelings once felt unsafe. Their instinct may be to solve everything internally, rather than seek comfort from another person. As trust develops, however, that pattern can begin to change. They may start allowing you into emotional areas they previously kept protected. They may explain what is bothering them, admit when they are hurt, acknowledge uncertainty, or ask for reassurance instead of pretending that nothing affects them. These moments may seem ordinary from the outside, but they can represent significant progress for someone who has spent years relying almost entirely on emotional self-protection. Trust can also change the meaning they assign to your behavior. Earlier in the relationship, they might automatically interpret repeated questions, emotional conversations, or requests for reassurance as attempts to control them. As their commitment becomes stronger, the same behavior can be understood differently. Instead of immediately thinking, "You are trying to control me," they may begin thinking, "Something is making you feel unsafe, and I want to understand it." That shift is enormous because it changes the relationship from defense versus pursuit into two people trying to understand each other. They may still maintain healthy boundaries. They may still need time to process difficult emotions. They may still value independence. But independence no longer requires emotional disconnection. They begin discovering that closeness and freedom can exist together, and that may be one of the most important signs of all. A person moving toward genuine commitment does not have to stop being independent. They simply stop treating independence as a reason to keep you at a permanent emotional distance. They begin making room for you, without feeling that making room means losing themselves. That is when commitment starts becoming less about giving up freedom and more about intentionally choosing partnership. When you spend enough time around people with avoidant attachment patterns, you start noticing certain changes that appear when they are genuinely considering a lasting future with someone. One question comes up again and again in discussions about avoidant psychology. What really changes when an avoidant begins moving towards serious commitment? Many people wonder if there are dependable signs showing that a relationship is moving beyond uncertainty. I have talked before about the kinds of partners avoidants may eventually feel comfortable settling down with, and the personal shifts that can happen along the way. But this time, the focus is slightly different. We are looking at what begins changing inside the relationship itself, from both partners' perspectives, when an avoidant starts becoming more willing to invest for the long term. These changes usually appear when they feel emotionally ready to go deeper. So if you are not seeing them yet, that does not automatically mean your partner does not care or has no intention of committing. It may simply mean they have not reached that stage. Think of these behaviors as possible indicators that a relationship is naturally moving towards something more serious, not as strict requirements that must appear immediately. One of the strongest and most meaningful changes is that the avoidant becomes noticeably more comfortable, allowing you to take the lead in certain relationship decisions. This can be especially noticeable in dismissive avoidant patterns, and some people observe it more often in men, although it certainly applies to women too. Normally, avoidants feel safest when they can control the pace of a relationship, because control helps them manage fears of losing independence, feeling trapped, or becoming emotionally overloaded. As trust develops, however, those fears can become quieter. Instead of needing to direct every step, they become more willing to follow your suggestions and consider your preferences without immediately feeling threatened. You might suggest making plans for a holiday, arranging a family gathering, or deciding what comes next for the relationship. Instead of resisting or becoming uncertain, they may simply say, "That sounds good," or "Let me know what you decide." This willingness to loosen their grip on control does not necessarily mean they are indifferent. It can reflect growing emotional safety, stronger trust in your judgment, and a deeper belief that allowing you to guide certain moments does not mean they are losing themselves or surrendering their independence. And this is where things become especially interesting, because small changes in everyday behavior can reveal more than dramatic declarations ever could. One of the clearest signs that an avoidant is seriously considering a long-term future with you is their growing comfort with sharing responsibility within the relationship. They stop acting as though they must control every major decision and begin accepting that healthy partnerships involve teamwork. They understand that if the relationship continues toward marriage or a lifelong commitment, both people will naturally make choices that affect their shared life. Another noticeable change is how much more they begin prioritizing your happiness and well-being. They pay closer attention to your emotions, your schedule, your routines, and the small details that matter to you. Instead of always waiting for you to explain every need, they may begin anticipating what could make you feel appreciated, because they have spent enough time learning your preferences. Their effort becomes more consistent and more intentional, showing that your comfort and happiness are becoming increasingly important to them. Another meaningful shift appears when you bring up conversations involving commitment or long-term plans. Earlier in the relationship, these discussions may have caused discomfort, hesitation, or emotional withdrawal because they activated fears about losing independence. As they become more committed, that reaction can begin fading. Instead of becoming defensive or asking to postpone the conversation, they respond with greater calm and openness. If you suggest celebrating a holiday together, planning a future trip, or discussing the next stage of the relationship, they are more likely to respond with a sincere yes, instead of saying they will think about it later. Their willingness to agree without immediately pulling away can reflect increasing trust and emotional security. It can also show that they are beginning to see themselves as an established part of your life, rather than someone standing cautiously on the outside, still unsure about how deeply they want to invest. Another powerful indicator appears when situations that once triggered strong defensive reactions no longer affect them in quite the same way, even though your behavior may not have changed very much. This does not mean neither person has grown. It means their emotional response has become healthier. For example, In relationships where one partner has anxious attachment tendencies and the other has avoidant tendencies, jealousy or fear of abandonment can create repeated conflict. Imagine an anxious partner becoming worried whenever the avoidant spends time away, uses their phone frequently, or goes out with friends. Earlier in the relationship, the avoidant might have reacted with frustration, insisting they were doing nothing wrong and questioning why they were not trusted. They might even have threatened to end the relationship because the suspicion felt overwhelming. As commitment develops, however, something important can change. Even if the anxious partner still experiences moments of insecurity, the avoidant may no longer react with the same irritation or defensiveness. Instead, they can become more patient, more understanding, and more willing to offer reassurance, rather than treating those fears as a personal attack. If you are wondering what this looks like in real life, the next change is especially revealing. Perhaps the greatest transformation happens somewhere nobody else can see. It happens inside the avoidant person's own internal dialogue. Their private thoughts begin changing. Instead of constantly asking themselves whether closeness will cost them their freedom, they slowly begin discovering that a healthy relationship can actually create more peace than distance ever provided. The protective habits that once helped them avoid emotional pain may begin feeling less necessary because they have experienced enough consistency to develop trust. They no longer feel the same need to test the relationship, prepare an escape route, or keep one foot permanently outside the door. They may still value personal space and independence, but those things are no longer controlled entirely by fear. Independence becomes a healthy part of their identity, rather than a wall they use to avoid emotional dependence. This distinction matters more than most people realize. A committed avoidant does not necessarily stop needing space. Instead, they stop using space as a weapon against closeness. They can step away to recharge without making the relationship feel threatened. They can have their own interests without making their partner feel excluded. They can protect their individuality while still allowing another person to matter deeply. That quiet internal adjustment becomes the foundation for almost every visible sign of commitment, because lasting behavioral change usually begins privately, long before anyone else can see it. The person may not announce that they have changed. They may not even fully realize how different they have become, but their choices start revealing it. They stay when leaving would have been easier. They communicate when silence would have felt safer. They include you when keeping everything separate would have required less vulnerability. They begin choosing connection without feeling as though connection has taken their freedom away. And that is when commitment starts becoming less about a promise for the future and more about a pattern already happening in the present.